I still had the courthouse sign-in pen in my hand when I saw her standing where I was supposed to be standing. I was wearing my blazer from the courtroom, the navy one with the coffee stain on the cuff that I'd tried to scrub out in the law library bathroom 20 minutes earlier. My court shoes were still on, the heels I hate, the ones that make my feet feel like they belong to someone else by the end of a trial day. I had a banker's box of files under one arm because I hadn't had time to drop it at the office, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should set it down before I walked into my own wedding. That's the kind of thought your brain gives you when it's trying to protect you from the bigger thought waiting right behind it. The clerk at the front of the registry office building looked up when I pushed through the doors, and her face did something I'll never forget. It wasn't surprise. It was the specific, careful blankness of someone who already knows what you're about to find and doesn't want to be the one to tell you. I asked her which room. She didn't answer right away. She just looked past me toward the hallway and said, "Room 2, very quietly, like she was sorry about it. I walked down that hallway in my work shoes on a floor so polished I could see the ceiling lights reflected in it, and through the glass panel in the door of room 2, I saw flowers. White ranunculus, the kind I'd specifically asked for because they don't wilt under venue lighting. I saw my mother near the back wall, one hand pressed flat against her chest like she was holding something in. I saw my younger brother Connor staring at his shoes. And at the front of the room, in the spot where I was supposed to be standing, in about 4 minutes, was my younger sister, Devon, in a cream-colored dress I had never seen before, holding a bouquet that matched the one I had ordered for myself down to the ribbon color. The marriage commissioner was closing her folder. The paperwork sat on a little table beside her, already signed. That was when my fiancé's mother, Linda, turned around and saw me standing in the doorway. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked satisfied, the way you look when a plan you've been quietly building for months finally clicks into place. She walked toward me with her chin up and said, "You're a bit late, aren't you, sweetheart?" And she said it the way you'd say something to a child who'd missed the school bus. Not unkind exactly. Worse than unkind. Pitying. I turned around. I don't remember deciding to turn around. My body just did it. The way you pull your hand back from a stove before your brain catches up to the pain. And that's when I saw him standing in the doorway behind me. A man I had never met in my life, holding a folder thick enough that I could tell, even from across the room, that whatever was inside it had taken someone a long time to put together. But you need the whole thing first, because none of that doorway makes any sense without it. My name is Hannah Whitfield, and at the time all this happened, I was 31 years old and working as a litigation associate at a mid-sized firm in Calgary. The kind of job where you bill your life in 6-minute increments and forget what your own kitchen looks like in daylight. I grew up in Lethbridge, the older of 2 kids, the one who read case law for fun in undergrad while everyone else was at the bar, the one my dad used to call the lawyer before I'd even gotten into law school, like he was manifesting it. I went to the University of Calgary for my JD, articled at a downtown firm that worked me half to death, and by the time I made associate, I had exactly the life I'd told myself I wanted. A condo near the Bow River I'd put a real down payment on. A line of credit I was actually paying down instead of just servicing the interest. A career where, on my good days, I genuinely felt like I was helping people who couldn't otherwise afford to be helped properly. I met Marcus Doyle at a fundraiser for legal aid, of all places, which felt like a good omen at the time. He worked in commercial insurance, the kind of job where he always had a story about a claim that made you shake your head, and he had this way of listening that made you feel like the only person in a crowded room. He got me a glass of water before I'd even said I was thirsty, just noticed I'd been talking for 20 minutes straight and hadn't had anything. I remember thinking, this one pays attention. That matters more than people think it does. We dated for almost a year before he moved into my condo. I want to be clear that it was my condo, my mortgage, my name on the title, because that detail matters later. He paid me back for groceries and utilities, roughly, the way two adults do when one of them travels for work and keeps weird hours. He never made me feel strange about my salary, which, after a few exes who'd gotten quietly competitive about it, felt like its own kind of relief. He'd introduce me at parties as my partner, the lawyer, with what felt like real pride in his voice. His mother, Linda, was a different story from the very first dinner. Linda was 60-something, recently retired from a school board admin job in Okotoks, and she had opinions about absolutely everything. My hours, my haircut, the fact that I didn't cook elaborate Sunday dinners, the fact that I sometimes worked through Thanksgiving, because that's what litigation does to you in the fall. The first time I met her, she looked at the dark circles under my eyes and said, "A woman who looks that tired all the time isn't going to make a very good wife," and laughed like it was a joke between friends. Except we weren't friends, and it wasn't a joke. Marcus brushed it off every single time. "That's just Mom," he'd say. "She does that to everyone." Except she didn't do it to Devin. My sister Devin had always been the easy one, the warm one, 3 years younger than me and somehow a decade more relaxed about everything. She worked in marketing for an outdoor gear company headquartered out of Canmore, the kind of job with flexible hours and casual Fridays, and she had this effortless way about her that made strangers want to be her friend within 5 minutes. I loved her. I want to say that clearly, because it makes everything that came after worse, not better. I loved my sister, and I had spent our whole lives being genuinely happy when good things happened to her, because that's what you do for the people you actually love. The three of us spent a lot of time together once Devin moved to Calgary for the job. Dinners, weekend trips to Canmore, Stampede every July. I never thought twice about it. Looking back now, with the particular clarity that only comes after everything falls apart, I can see the moments I missed. The way Devin would touch Marcus's arm a beat too long when something was funny. The way he'd text her to check in on Hannah when I was buried in a file at the office, as if she had some special access to my emotional state that he didn't. The way Linda would light up the second Devin walked in a room, calling her such a grounded girl, which always landed like a quiet comparison I wasn't supposed to notice. Marcus proposed on a Sunday morning in our kitchen. No big production, just him, a ring, and a question that made my hands shake so badly. I almost dropped my coffee. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We called my parents. My dad cried, which he never does. I spent that whole week walking around my own condo, touching things like I was seeing them for the first time, the counter, the door frame, my own hands, thinking, this is actually happening. This is mine. We planned a small civil ceremony at the registry office downtown. Just immediate family and 2 close friends, followed by dinner at a restaurant in Inglewood I'd been wanting to try for 2 years. I'd watched colleagues spend 18 months and $40,000 planning weddings, while their relationships quietly came apart underneath all that planning, and I didn't want that. I wanted the marriage. I wanted it simple and real and mine. Devin was the one who helped me find my dress, a fitted cream sheath from a boutique on 17th Avenue, $420 after a tax, which I remember exactly because I'm the kind of person who keeps receipts. She came to both alteration appointments. She organized a small dinner for me at a wine bar the week before. She listened to me complain about seating logistics for a 12-person dinner, like it was the most interesting thing she'd heard all month. She was, by every measure I had, doing exactly what a maid of honor does. I should have known that's precisely the kind of closeness, that lets someone walks straight into the middle of your life without you ever hearing the door open. 9 days before the wedding, a file landed on my desk that I almost handed to a colleague, and I think about that decision more than almost anything else from that whole period. A client of our pro bono housing clinic, a woman named Priya Sandhu, was facing an illegal eviction with a hearing date that had somehow gotten moved up to the morning of my wedding. Her landlord's lawyer had filed an emergency motion late on a Thursday, clearly hoping nobody would be ready to fight it on short notice. And if we lost, Priya and her 2 kids would be out of their apartment with nowhere to go before Christmas. I looked at the file at 11 at night and felt that particular cold focus settle into me, the one that shows up right before I do my best work. I told Marcus the hearing was the same morning as the wedding. He went quiet on the phone for a second, then said, "Okay, just be done by noon, right? We're at 1. I had a full hour of buffer built in. It felt fine. It felt completely fine. I should have heard something in that pause, but I didn't because I trusted him. And trust is the thing that makes you bad at noticing the exact moment you shouldn't. The morning of the wedding, I was at the Court of King's Bench by 8:30. The hearing went well for the first 40 minutes. Then opposing counsel pulled a procedural maneuver I hadn't seen coming, a request to introduce last-minute documentation that, if the judge allowed it, would have buried Priya's case entirely. I had to argue against it on the spot, no notes, no prep, just pure instinct built from 6 years of doing this job. The judge took a recess to consider it. Recesses in family and housing court are never quick. By the time she ruled in our favor and I'd confirmed, Priya wasn't getting put out on the street 2 weeks before Christmas. It was 12:50. I called Marcus from the hallway outside the courtroom, straight to voicemail. I called again, voicemail again. I texted, "Hearing ran long. We won. Leaving right now. Please wait for me. I love you. I'm coming." And I grabbed my banker's box because I didn't have time to drop it anywhere, and I half ran to my car, still in my court blazer. The drive from the courthouse to the registry office downtown should take 12 minutes. It took 26 because of construction on Memorial Drive that I will resent for the rest of my life. I parked illegally, hazards on, and I walked through those doors at exactly the moment I described to you already. Except, as I would learn from my own mother in that hallway, her voice shaking in a way I'd never heard from her. Marcus had moved the ceremony up 40 minutes earlier that morning, citing some excuse about the marriage commissioner having another booking, an excuse Linda had apparently suggested to him over breakfast. The ceremony had started at 12:15. It had ended at 12:31. And Devin had been standing in my spot the entire time, 16 minutes, holding flowers that matched mine. I stood in that hallway with the receptionist's eyes still on me and somebody's laugh, soft and confused, drifting out of one of the side offices, and Linda was walking toward me with that satisfied look on her face, and I turned toward the exit because I genuinely could not process what I was looking at. 2 people I trusted more than almost anyone on earth deciding, on the exact morning I'd spent fighting to keep a mother and 2 kids in their home, that my time was simply up. That's when I saw him in the doorway. He was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right in the shoulders, the kind you buy off the rack when you need something fast. And he had a manila folder under one arm thick enough to mean somebody had spent real time on it. He wasn't looking around the room the way a stranger does when he's lost. He was looking directly at me, and the expression on his face wasn't confusion or apology. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. "Hannah Whitfield," he said. I nodded because my mouth had gone completely dry. "Detective Aaron Brewer, Calgary Police Service, Economic Crimes Unit," he said. "I've been trying to reach you for 4 days. I left 2 messages at your firm." He glanced past me into the room I'd just walked out of, and something tightened in his jaw, though his voice stayed even. "I'm going to need a few minutes of your time." Linda materialized at my elbow the way she always seemed to, like she'd been standing just out of sight, waiting for her cue. "This is a private family matter," she said, smiling that same satisfied smile. "And you're interrupting." Detective Brewer looked at her the way you look at a red light you have absolutely no intention of stopping at. "Ma'am, I wasn't speaking to you." He held the door for me, and I walked through it, because at that point I think I would have followed almost anyone out of that room. We stood in the corridor, fluorescent light buzzing overhead the way it does in every government building in this country, and I looked down at my court shoes and had this strange, floating thought that I should probably sit down. Then Detective Brewer opened the folder, and I forgot about my feet entirely. "How much do you know about Marcus Doyle's financial history?" he asked. "He's in commercial insurance," I said slowly. "He does fine. We split groceries and utilities." I never looked into his finances. There wasn't a reason to. "Were you aware he was named in a civil fraud complaint in Red Deer 2 years ago?" "No. Were you aware there's an outstanding judgment against him for $168,000 from a failed property flip in 2022? My legs went cold in a way I can only describe as a kind of internal weather system. "No." He laid out the documents with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times before: court filings, account statements, and a name I didn't recognize on an incorporation document. A numbered company, registered in Alberta, operating under the name Doyle Park Holdings. I stared at it for a second before the second word landed properly. Park. Devon's middle name, the name she used professionally on certain documents, because Whitfield, our family name, was already taken by half a dozen other Devons in the marketing world. "Doyle Park Holdings was incorporated 16 months ago," Detective Brewer said, "capitalized primarily through wire transfers from a joint line of credit Mr. Doyle opened last spring." He paused, watching my face carefully. "Mrs. Whitfield, did you co-sign any credit facilities with Mr. Doyle in the last year?" I opened my mouth, closed it. There had been a Saturday morning at a branch on Center Street, 8 months ago, a stack of paperwork Marcus said was for refinancing the condo to get a better rate. He'd had a pen in my hand before I'd finished reading past the first page, and I'd just come off a 40-hour stretch prepping for trial, and I had trusted him completely, the way you trust someone you're about to legally bind your life to. "I think I did," I said. My voice came out flat and strange, like it belonged to someone standing slightly behind me. "That line of credit funded Doyle Park Holdings," he said. "Over 11 months, roughly $94,000 moved through it. Your name is on that account, which is why we've been trying to reach you, to determine whether you were a participant or whether you were a victim." I gripped the wall behind me, the cold government gray paint of it, suddenly the most solid thing in the room. $94,000. I thought about every extra file I'd taken on, every weekend I'd skipped to bill more hours, every vacation I'd canceled because a client needed something urgently. I had been building a life one careful brick at a time, and I had been so consumed with the building that I hadn't noticed someone quietly carrying the bricks away through the back. "Victim," I said. "Definitely victim." "That's what I suspected," he said. "I'll need a formal statement from you, but I wanted you to know first, because of the timing, that Mr. Doyle and Ms. Whitfield, your sister, I'm told, were scheduled to be served with civil subpoenas today regarding this investigation. That's why I'm here." I looked back toward the closed door. Marcus was in there. Devon was in there. Linda was in there, gloating, and they were all about to be served, right there in the same room where the marriage commissioner's ink hadn't even dried yet. I straightened up. I shifted my banker's box to my other hip. I took one long breath and said, "Detective Brewer, may I walk back in with you?" He studied me for a second. "You can stand by the door," he said. "Don't say anything until I'm finished." I nodded. I didn't need to say a single word, not yet. We went back in together, and the room went still in that particular, cold way, not the polite settling down kind of quiet, the held breath kind. My mother's hand dropped away from her chest the second she saw my face. Connor stopped looking at his shoes. Marcus, who had been standing near the little registration table, with Devon's hand still in his, looked up, saw the detective's badge clipped to his belt, and the color drained out of his face so fast it looked almost clinical, like something you'd actually study. Devon saw it a half-second later. I watched her eyes go from me to the detective to the folder under his arm, and I watched the precise moment she understood what was happening, because her grip on Marcus's hand tightened before he pulled his away from her entirely, which told me everything I needed to know about the actual shape of that particular partnership. Linda stepped forward, the only person in the room still composed. "Who exactly are you?" "Detective Aaron Brewer, Economic Crimes." He reached into the folder. "I have civil subpoenas for Marcus Andrew Doyle and Devon Lynn Whitfield related to an active financial fraud investigation involving Doyle Park Holdings." He held out the first document. "Mr. Doyle." Marcus didn't move for a second. He was looking at me, and his face had folded into something I'd genuinely never seen on him before. Not guilt exactly, more like the expression of a man who had run the numbers carefully and had just discovered, in real time, that he'd gotten the math wrong. "You'll want to take this, sir," Brewer said, not unkindly. Marcus took it. His hand was shaking badly enough that the paper rattled. "Mrs. Whitfield." Brewer turned to Devon. She looked, for 1 second, like someone had pulled the floor out from underneath her without warning. She was still holding the bouquet that matched mine. She took the subpoena, and it slipped from her fingers, and she had to bend down in that cream-colored dress to pick it back up off the floor, and when she straightened, her whole face had gone a deep, blotchy red. The room was completely silent except for a strange, strangled sound coming from somewhere near Linda. Then my mother said, loud and clear from the back wall, "Well, I'll be goddamned." And despite everything, despite every part of me that was breaking quietly in real time, I almost laughed. Detective Brewer turned to me and gave a small professional nod, then handed me a card. "My office will follow up Monday. You'll want a lawyer of your own for this part." "I am one," I said, "but I'll bring a different one." He left. I stood in the middle of that registry office room in my work blazer, with a banker's box still on my hip, and I looked at Marcus Doyle, who had moved our wedding up by 40 minutes so I would miss it, who had put my name on documents without telling me what they actually were, who had built a numbered company with my own sister using money that was, in significant part, mine. I said exactly one thing to him: I hope it was worth it. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked over to where my mother was standing, and she put her arms around me, and I let her, and for about 10 seconds I let myself feel every part of it at once: the exhaustion, the humiliation, the genuine grief for something I had actually stupidly, completely loved. 10 seconds. Then I stepped back, squeezed her hand, and said, "I'm okay. Let's go." Connor grabbed my mom's coat off the back of a chair and fell into step behind us, and 2 of my actual friends who'd come for me followed too, and we walked out of that building together, and the door closed behind us, and that was the last time I was ever in a room with Marcus Doyle. The months after that were not clean. Nothing about real life ever is, no matter how satisfying the version you tell at dinner parties later sounds. I hired a family lawyer named Carol Ferris out of a firm in Mount Royal, a small, sharp woman who had the unbothered energy of someone who'd seen every version of this story and stopped being surprised by any of them a decade ago. She made 3 calls in the first 48 hours, one to the bank, to formally separate my name from that line of credit and flag the activity for the fraud unit. One to the Crown's Economic Crimes Liaison to make sure my status as a victim was clearly on record, and one to Marcus's lawyer to let him know I'd be pursuing recovery, and that we had documentation going back 16 months. Marcus's lawyer called Carol back within 5 hours, which she told me afterward with a thin little smile was the fastest callback she'd gotten in 12 years of practice. The civil case took just over 6 months. I won't walk you through every motion and counter-motion because living through it once was enough for one lifetime. What I'll tell you is that by the end, I'd recovered $68,000 of the $94,000 that had moved through that account. Not all of it. Enough to matter. Doyle Park Holdings predictably collapsed under the weight of its own debts. The 2 investors Marcus had brought in were furious, and one of them filed a separate suit that's apparently still working its way through the system somewhere in Red Deer. Marcus and Devin, and yes, I'm fully aware of how this lands, filed for separation 5 months after their registry office wedding. I heard it through Connor, who heard it through a friend, who still worked with Devin at the outdoor gear company. Apparently, the weight of an active fraud investigation does the thing love can't always survive on its own. I didn't feel sorry for either of them, and I won't pretend otherwise. I also didn't feel triumphant, not the way I thought I might. Mostly I felt tired, the specific bone-deep tired that comes after you've spent months holding yourself together in public. And then, slowly, somewhere around month 4, that tiredness started turning into something that actually felt like relief. Linda called me once, about 3 months after everything came apart. 9 in the evening on a Tuesday, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked up anyway, because I wanted to hear what she'd say. "I didn't know about the money," she said. "I want you to know that." I was quiet for a second. Then I said, "Linda, with respect, that's not actually the thing you owe me an apology for." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she hung up. I set my phone face down on the counter, made a cup of tea, and stood there watching the steam come off it, thinking about all the things I could have said to her over the years and never did. I decided the silence had been the right call, after all. Priya Sandhu and her 2 kids stayed in their apartment through that whole winter. I ran into her at a grocery store on 4th Street, about 2 months after the wedding that wasn't, and her younger daughter recognized me before Priya did and ran over and hugged my leg like I was somebody famous. Priya thanked me again, the way she had at the courthouse, and I told her, the way I always do, that it was my job. But standing there in the cereal aisle with a kid's arms wrapped around my knee, I thought about how many different ways that sentence applies. Thank you for staying. I stayed in that hearing room that morning instead of walking out to save my own timeline, and I would make the exact same choice again without a second of hesitation. And that fact tells me more about who I actually am than almost anything else from that whole year. I moved out of the condo. Technically, Marcus moved out, since it was always legally mine, and I'm grateful now for every boring, unglamorous hour I spent at the lawyer's office years earlier, making sure the title stayed in my name only. I found a smaller place in Bridgeland with a balcony that gets the morning sun, and a landlord who actually answers his phone. I got a rescue dog from the Calgary Humane Society, a scruffy little terrier mix named Judge, which Connor still thinks is the funniest thing I've ever done, and he destroys exactly 1 sock a week and is, somehow, completely worth it. I don't have some tidy conclusion about love or trust, or what it means to be betrayed by the 2 people you'd have trusted with your actual life. What I have is this. I spent the morning of my own wedding fighting to keep a mother and her 2 kids from losing their home over Christmas, and I would make that same call again every single time. No hesitation, no math. Marcus used to say my job made me hard to reach. Linda said it outright, more than once. Even Devin, late one night after too much wine, once told me it sometimes felt like the firm was my real relationship. Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. But the morning everything fell apart, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Doing exactly the work I was built to do, and a family I'd never met before that week got to stay in their own home through the holidays because of it. I'll take that trade every single time, and I don't lie awake wondering if I made the right call. I already know I did.